My name is Marc-André Pigeon, or Marc-André Pigeon, and I am the director of the Canadian Centre for the Study of Co-operatives. I want to begin by acknowledging that here in Saskatoon, we're coming to you from Treaty 6 territory. This is a land of many nations, the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and it's also the traditional homeland of the Métis. We're grateful for this opportunity that we have to work on this land, share in its bounty, reflect on its beauty, and reaffirm our commitment to the shared, necessary, important, and hard work of reconciliation, both in the universities and in the cooperative sector. Now, when I think of the beauty of this land and it's our shared kind of labor here, I also think about how we cannot take our good fortune for granted. Excuse me. Over the last few months, we've observed elections here in Saskatchewan, provincial, municipal, in the United States, other provinces. And what strikes me about these events is the near total absence of any conversation about climate change and the environment. These are kind of silent topics, and yet they're looming large, and whether we like it or not. It's hard not to be a little, if you're somebody who thinks about these things, it's hard not to be a little bit disheartened because we know we've solved big collective action problems before. So we can do it again if we can put our minds to it. The good news is that today's talk is going to put that issue, this issue of sustainability, climate, front and center. And our speaker today, Rafael, I'll introduce in a minute, is going to explore this concept and share with us this concept of circular economy. It's a model of production and consumption that involves sharing, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, and recycling materials and products to extend their life cycle for as long as possible. I have hope that movements like these can provide us with the real avenues to change our consumption patterns that can help with sustainability and climate change. And just on a real personal note, I've been trying to get the university here to allow me to purchase a computer that's modular and that I can repair and refurbish and augment and change as much as I like, and run into these challenges where they've got big agreements with large firms that preclude going down these kind of venues. So I'm really excited for Rafael's talk. And let me say a few words about Rafael. Rafael is Ziegler is a professor at HEC Montréal, or I don't know how you say this in English, HEC Montreal, and a member of our Canadian Centre for the Study of Co-operatives Advisory Council. He is the director of the Alphonse et Dorimène Desjardins International Institute of Cooperatives. They're a bit like our counterpart in Quebec. He's an associate editor of the Journal of Human Development and Capabilities, as well as the Journal of Social Entrepreneur. And he's a member of this is another French term, le Réseau Québécois de Recherche en Économie Circulaire. This I do have a translation for, the Quebec Network for Research in Circular Economy. I can also say that Rafael's become an increasingly close colleague and brother in arms, if I can say it that way. I feel very fortunate to have gotten to know him over the last couple of years or year and a half. So before we hear from Rafael, just a word on our co-op conversation series. For the next 20 minutes or so, Rafael's going to share his talk. It's called Cooperatives in the Circular Economy, Roles, Potentials, and Challenges. Then we're going to have a short conversation with myself and Rafael, and then we're going to do breakout groups. We're going to do that process today. And Rafael has a couple of questions queued up for us. We'll do that for about 12, 15 minutes. We always, as you know, those of you who participated before, we often lose a few people in these breakouts, but what we do hear from the assessments we get back is that when you do stick around, you get a lot of value from them. They're a way for people to meet new people and to kind of build your own networks of relationships in the cooperative sector. Finally, if anyone's experiencing technical difficulties, you can message Stan Yu. And Stan, can you wave to folks?
Everyone.
And he'll be able to help you. Finally, we're going to be recording this session, and we'll share the link with everyone who registered for the event. We'll probably get that out to you tomorrow or later by Friday at the latest. So, Rafael, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much for the introduction, Marc-André, and for being able to share a bit of what we're doing here in relation of co-ops and circular economy. Maybe before I get to the topic, what you said it in the beginning about the land made me think that when I first came to Montreal, I did a PhD at McGill, and our PhD coordinator, Claudine Lefort, she had a big poster behind her desk, which had something like Canada, the land of possibilities. And then there was a gigantic plain with agriculture. So I was thinking, okay, these are maybe these kind of prairies with agricultural co-ops that you could see there in the line of possibilities. When I was at when I was McGill, I was as well a TA in the School of Environment, where we had Aldo Leopold's book, The Land Ethic, where Leopold had basically responded to the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, where there had been kind of a combination of droughts, overplowing, monoculture that created these storms that put a lot of people at risk and created quite some political issues as well. And his argument was basically that in order to respond to that, we need to have a fundamental rethink, which he called the land ethic, and to move from a kind of ethic based on reciprocity between citizens of a town, of a country, or even citizens of the world, towards an ethic which extends this reciprocity also to the land. He thought this was an evolutionary necessity. And he was also kind of optimistic about it. So what Marc-André said about current politics is, of course, a question, is this a necessity or ever constant back and forth? Of course, also including with who is on this land before, right, which you also spoke about. So this is a very important topic, and I think the way the circular economy today is one way of thinking about this topic from a co-op lens, in the sense that cooperatives are obviously well known as organizations that can speak to a social need and advance it organizationally. And I think the interesting question is to what extent they can extend the social reciprocity that they're known for to also a social ecological reciprocity in the light of these multiple crises that we have. And so this is one way of thinking about it, a kind of way, I would say, of operationalizing sustainability is this topic of the circular economy that I want to say a few words about today. I have only 15 minutes, so I'm probably not talking about what you had expected, so don't hesitate to put in your comments in the chat, etc. I should also emphasize that it's work done with lots of people. You see here on the screen that's part of our partnership. So I have no claim to originality here. Just sharing a few thoughts. Can you actually see my screen? Okay, perfect. And so why do we speak of a circular economy? I think the answer is very simple, because we don't live in one, right? We are really still very deeply embedded in a linear economy, meaning a way of extracting natural resources, using them for production, distributing them, consuming them, and then having a lot of issues with waste and pollution. You can see here for Quebec, the estimate is that the circularity rate, so the amount of so-called waste that is reused in different ways, is at about 3.5%. The global estimate is 8.6%. With some outliers, the Netherlands are much higher, for example. And the estimate is that for meeting the demands such as climate change that Marc-André mentioned, we would need around 17% minimum. And so that's just for circularity. You could easily add, carbon emissions, where Canada is also more a high outlier, right, for the emissions, or food waste. So there's lots of things where this, I think this linear economy is manifest. And I think that also explains why circular economy has kind of become popular as a way to say, okay, we need to do something about this, and it's a kind of promise to move beyond that. And there's no internationally established definition of circular economy. So what we're using in this project is a definition that has come about in a kind of stakeholder process in Quebec, which says if we talk about circular economy, we're talking about a system. So I think that's a really important point. So so we're not just talking about individual organizations or consumers. We're really talking about a system of production and consumption. And when we talk about a system, of course, there's this idea of optimizing resource use in the system. But there's also really another important point, which I want to highlight in this definition here in green, that we're saying where we have to abandon this old idea that if we have economic development, somehow it will generate the well-being. No, we really need to give a function to that system, or think of how the system can be organized in such a way that it will reduce the overall environmental footprint and also really contribute to the well-being of individuals and communities. As you know, these two goals are not always easily linked together, right? So there's very big political challenges behind this. And these challenges, I think that's why one of the reasons why this concept has become popular in the circular economy discussion. They can kind of be broken down in what's often called circularity strategies. So here you see the Quebec version of this. There's many versions of this, but I think they're quite similar, where you can find something that I think is mostly associated with circular economy, giving resources a new life. So recycling or using waste to produce new things, but also extending the life of products and components, right? Think of repair, which I think was probably Marc-André's idea with his computer, that you can, extend the life of the computer. And also important, intensify product use. So ensure that it's not just used once and then you abandon it, or it's just standing around. So more use of a product that's already made. So these are different kind of strategies. And what I just want to highlight here, which seems to be very important and nice about this representation, is these are kind of downstream or midstream strategies. But before all of that, there is also this category that they call rethink upstream. So I would say the question of how you enter the circle, which is really a very fundamental way of what kind of consumption is really desirable if you want to have a circular economy, what kind of eco-conception, so what kind of products and services can contribute to that. And all in a spirit that if you really want to have a circular economy, we know we need to shift very strongly from a fossil fuel-based, mineral-based economy towards one that is a regenerative economy, so based on resources that can regenerate. So this is a very, very big challenge, and that's why it's also more, an ideal at the moment than a reality. But I think this upstream category of rethinking is really very interesting, and also maybe the most interesting part from a co-op perspective of this concept. At the same time, with all these strategies, you can also easily see why circular economy is often called a technocratic discourse. So one that focuses very much on different technologies, which for us raises this question, to put it in co-op terms, what about the social categories? Who owns the circular economy? And where would you see in such a production function, where would you really see the place of cooperatives beyond specific recycling strategies and so forth? So that's kind of the question that was the entry point for this partnership that I mentioned, where so since 2003, we're working with some partners in the Americas and Europe to better understand, on the one hand, what kind of co-ops focused on circularity are already out there. So we want to build a database, which we will put on the Portail Co-op, which is a kind of digital library for cooperatives. And there we have created a circular economy collection where we want to put these co-ops online so that people can find them if they're interested, along with this is the second part of the partnership, creating tools and modules. So what can co-ops who are interested in the topic do to appropriate the topic? So you see here this little blue thing. It's called a crab. It's a symbol for a canvas, a social business canvas that's designed to say, okay, if you're a co-op, what would be a canvas that helps you to think about integration of circularity into a cooperative? So it's a kind of variation on a social business canvas, just specifically made for co-ops and circularity. So this is the kind of thing we want to do. And the third part, which is more the focus today, is, of course, we want to think about these questions of linking cooperatives and circular economy, both as a question of conceptual reflection, but also empirical research. And on this topic, I just want to share with you, since I don't have much time, just four topics or four observations that we're working on, and that are all based basically on this process of creating a database, which we did on the first year. So we have about 750 co-ops from these 12 countries. And then we sent a survey to them, about 25% responded. And now we're in the process of thinking What does this mean for thinking about circularity in co-ops? And we're organized around 4 topics: business models, governance, technology, and regional embedding and sense of place. Of course, these topics are overlapping, but just to give you an idea why the following 4 slides are just organized in that way. So one observation for this first topic of the circular co-op business models. When we did the survey, one aspect that was quite interesting is that so we asked the co-ops to say where do they see their circularity strategies, and there was a very, very strong preference for the upstream strategies. So this kind of rethinking was very strongly pronounced, with the sharing economy most popular, and then rethinking production and consumption. And another part, so this is my colleague Jonas, he made this analysis here of, he basically said, okay, so people can pursue several strategies. So that's another important point. Organizations don't pursue one strategy, they tend to have several ones at the same time. And so they could indicate which ones they do. And so this figure here shows interconnections between strategies. So if an organization does one strategy, does it also do the other one? And what you can see here, that's the kind of in blue, these kind of upstream categories around responsible consumption, sharing economy, and optimization, they are very strongly interconnected. So suggesting there is some sort of interesting way in which in the minds of these co-ops that participated, there is a link here of really trying to have a specific kind of entry point into the circularity topic. In terms of the survey, there was a significant correlation between co-ops that said they're pursuing circularity from their foundation, from inception, and have it integrated in their model, and actually generating revenue. So that was interesting. That was really a good correlation, which, however, really was for the small and medium-sized co-ops. For the larger cooperatives, it was much more that the responses were exploring it. So there were very few examples of fully integrated. They more said we're exploring this topic, but not fully integrated. So there's kind of a difference between maybe these. It's an exploratory survey, so I can't claim representation here, but there is potentially a difference here between these kind of new cooperatives that have been started with this as a mission, and more established cooperatives that are now opening up to the topic, but are more in an exploratory mode. And then for the topic of circular co-op of governance, one impression here, we also asked the co-ops why did they adopt circularity. And one interesting, I mean, for you, it's not a surprise, but still it's a good indication, I think. So why did they adopt circularity? It was very clearly mission and goals were the top priority why they did it. Whereas, for example, policy or legal requirements, or also technical opportunity, so to say we have a new technology that we want to introduce in the market, were relatively low ranking as a reason why they adopted circularity. So this is on that level, which is there is a similar study on circular businesses where you really do not find this aspect of mission-driven circularity. We also, of course, know that this governance is not just within the cooperative, it's also between organizations. So that's why we also asked them about who are their partners. And here there was a very strong priority for other co-ops and social enterprises. But also, I think important to note, municipalities and public partners are really very crucial, kind of the same importance as other co-ops, at least according to this survey. Which takes me to another topic, which is kind of a really tricky topic, but an interesting one. So we have this famous co-op identity with its values and 7 principles. And at least according to my reading of this co-op identity, it doesn't really say much about technology as such. So I think it tends to suggest that with these values and principles, we can kind of use technology as a tool and then, appropriate it to our ends. So very principle-driven thinking about technology. And now, since this is such a technology-driven discourse, we asked, of course, also in the survey about technology. And there the respondents did indeed say that technology is either very important or important for them, 80%. So clear confirmation. And then there was, however, something that we're still trying to think about, that about half of the respondents said something that is maybe pursuing a typical and distinct co-op approach to circularity that builds up on this business models and governance. And they said, so yes, we're developing our own circular economy approach without dependence on other actors. For this, that would be another distinct aspect, I think, of a circular approach to technology. They said they heavily rely on the competencies of their members. And they often said, we don't protect our technology, or we favor some sort of commons approach for the technology that we develop. So that was about one half, which has this kind of principle-driven approach to technology. However, what was interesting, there was also another half, which said, they depend on other actors for their technology. And when we then asked further, where is this technology coming from? The overwhelming majority said they are from non-co-op partners, right? And so, at least to my mind, if you look into technology studies, there is the claim that the technological embeddedness, that is where your technology comes from, tends to have also relatively strong impacts on what you can really do, what kind of priorities you have. And that's the question here for me, is therefore, for co-ops and circular economy, given the fact that for quite some technologies we are in sort of larger socio-technical systems, what kind of autonomy do co-ops in different sectors really have in the choice and development of technology? So there are some, the more radical co-ops that say we have a low-tech approach where we really want to develop, so to speak, outside of the system, our own technology. So that exists. But I think that's fairly marginal if you look into across the different sectors. And so there is then more the question for this technology adoption, what are really the different opportunities here? As a question. And then just for this last point with so in the circular economy literature, it's often said if we truly want to have a transition to just and sustainable circular economies, it is clear that this has to be favoring a regionally embedded economies. And I think there the co-ops again have an interesting contribution to make because they are known as regionally embedded organizations, and that was also very clearly in evidence in the survey, where 77% of the participants said so the participants said that 77% of their customers and beneficiaries are really in the region, so clearly strongly embedded. It was similar for their where they get their materials from, again with this exception of technology. So I think there's a strong case for this, that with co-ops you can more strongly embedded circular economies in a regional way. What we added tier 2, because we thought it's distinct about the co-op governance, is one that happens on the organization level, but also on federations, intersectoral federations. We also asked where do they get their support from, and so there, on the one hand, 28% of the co-ops said they received support from circular economy related networks, and in order for importance, this was governments, then universities, and then private foundations. And then 34% of cooperatives said they received support from a co-op network for their development of the circular economy approach. And then, so there were open questions here. And then when we asked, so what kind of support did you receive? And there the pattern was very clear that there was basically no dedicated circular economy approach. They basically received support for legal advice, business plan development, and so kind of, I would say, more the traditional co-op development. So there's a question here for me, what is the role and positioning maybe of this kind of co-op ecosystem? Linking, given that there is this emerging trend of co-ops that's quite clear in the survey in our database, and what is the role of federations with respect to that? I have prepared this also as some questions, but I think here Marc-André is taking over if I know properly.
Thank you, Rafael. That was really interesting. I have a ton of questions, but maybe before we consider breaking out, I was wondering if you could share an example just to kind of pin you down a little bit, because I've seen examples in the Montreal region at your event earlier this year. But can you share an example or two of a cooperative that's really doing the circular economy, from the ground up kind of thing?
Yeah. Maybe first two examples from kind of new co-ops that are started really with circularity as a value. So in our university context, we have one worker co-op, for example, that said beer is popular in Montreal. If you produce beer, it produces this byproduct which is called dresch, so the kind of spelt grain, I think, which is a kind of stinking byproduct of beer brewing. And this in cities is usually considered as an organic waste, and that is sort of expensive to remove. And they said how this waste is actually an organic waste, so it's valuable. Could we not dry it? And if we dry it, make something new with it. And with this, they discovered that if you dry this spelt grain, you can produce a flour that is low in gluten, and that you can sell to bakers, right? So there is a kind of revalorization of something that was considered as a waste, and you see this same phenomenon now popping up in other places too. So really a nice way of reusing something that's a waste in a city. Another student was during the COVID crisis, there was all this online ordering. So she was frustrated with the amount of plastic that this involves. And so they had the idea of could we provide a service of a logistician to say, if I order from a restaurant in Montreal, could this food come in, so this strategy is called reuse, could come in boxes that this co-op, it's called Returnsy, organizes that they get cleaned and come back to the restaurant, so that you avoid this kind of plastic involved in online orderings that was exploding with the pandemic. So that would be more logistician in this kind of middle space of the co-op space. And maybe one example for a bigger co-op, also from Quebec. So there's a big agriculture co-op, Solio. And of course, they have a lot of organic waste too. And so one thing they're exploring is to use this organic waste to give it to a private company that feeds insects to produce protein. And so this would be, again, an interesting way of revalorizing a waste that before was just, what do you do with it? And there you could feed insects. That is increasingly considered an interesting source of protein, right, for animal feed or even for human consumption.
Well, that's really, really interesting and great examples, Rafael. You know what? I'm gonna open it up to conversation now. I know we have our questions. We'll hold those back for just a moment and see if people have any questions for Rafael. Please post them in chat or raise your hand, virtual or real. Stan, you're watching for for real hands, and I'll try and keep an eye out for virtual hands. Anyone have any questions for Rafael? Well, we're just give people a second here. Rafael, you mentioned just while we're waiting for people to throw a question down, some of your survey results. The one where you had the mission and purpose, I think, was driving a lot of the uptake on kind of circular economy thinking, and you had public policy, way down the list.
Yeah.
Do you have any sense of how many jurisdictions actually impose some sort of circular economy requirement? Like, is that just an artifact of the fact that maybe policymakers aren't actually taking this up, or what's going on there?
So this is a really good question. So this is what we're doing right now. We're having also in each of these 12 countries, we're looking, what are the circular economy roadmaps and policies?
Right.
And also to what extent do they recognize social economy as part of these policies? And so, for example, in Canada, I would say there is most of the recognition. So I'm just can talk about Quebec for now. There is some recognition on the Quebec level on the traditional integration of social economy in recycling and waste management. And on the municipal level of Montreal, it has become much more strongly that you could consider not just regulatory, but also in terms of economic support, social economy organizations and co-ops, precisely with this idea, if we have a circular economy transition that is just and sustainable, then we need to think about the working conditions and what kind of organizations do that. So that's happening, but we want to understand this better. My hunch is that since a lot of these co-ops are smaller organizations, that have been founded with the circularity in place and it works for them, but they're fairly small. They might also have less on their radar the kind of policy questions that big organizations do. But that's just my hunch. Huh?
Yeah, I'm gonna throw one more at you because you raised the matter of bugs and and policy and these are I don't know if you're aware, but these are often very politicized topics, right? Like some people will say there's a plot to organize production so that we eat more bugs and that we do these kind of things. Has this and there's the 15-minute city, which is not necessarily circular economy, but these are kind of pro environmental, pro kind of small scale production that have become hyper politicized. Has this come across your radar in your research at all? This politicization of
Politicizing
circular
of
economy?
such. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe not. I'm just curious.
I mean, I think there has been quite a lot of discussion about single-use plastics, right? Where
Yes,
there was
big
quite some back and
straws.
forth
Yes, yes.
of that. And I think because it's so contentious, a lot of politicians shy away actually from food choice questions,
Right.
where you could have a lot of impact on climate if you had some more restrictions or veggie day and stuff like this. But I think for that reason, it's not happening. And so the plan, the green economy plan of Quebec, for example, is very much focused on kind of positive incentives such as subsidizing for single electric cars, rather than these kind of harder questions of shifting to more public transportation
Right.
and where you have
Okay.
contestation maybe.
Thank you, Rafael. I see a question from Michael. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, thank you very, very much for this work and for sharing some of it with us very quickly. I look forward very much to hearing more. I wanted to ask you, something about in the sense that, some commentators say that we have in the United States a certain reaction to climate change and the threat to the petroleum economy. And there's a nice paper called about petromasculinity, misogynistic and racist and authoritarian right-wing populism and so on, which some people call petromasculinity. But it seems to me that, the challenge, and here we are in Saskatchewan, where the funding for our center partly comes from a very large co-op, which is very dependent on the oil sands, which has a refinery, which is one of the dirtiest refineries in North America, I think. And, so we're very married to this system. And let's not, be too Pollyannish about the degree to which co-ops are removing themselves, even Soleo, from the industrial agriculture model, as good as they are, and they are advanced. So I'm just wondering, how can we get to a more transformative state where there's through cognitive praxis or something where people come to think of other options. And I'm just reading about some Chinese rural cooperatives where the whole village is converting in a very interesting way. And it is transformative, often led by women and by a school teacher or something, people from outside the traditional co-op movement. But it seems to me really what we're talking about is a knowledge politics, reskilling and educating consumers and workers to think differently about what they're doing, and managers, not trivially, and elected officials, so that we can get to, what I like to call a knowledgeable economy, not a knowledge-based economy, but a knowledgeable economy. And I just wanted to ask you, do you see examples of that too, where of course, it happens around the margins, but where it's a direct sort of conscious effort by co-ops to transform the people that they're working with in this process?
So, I mean, that's of course a complicated, multi-layered question that you have there, and it's very important and interesting. I mean, the first thing to maybe say is that in this database we created simply by saying, okay, we have these 12 strategies. Let's look what we can find in these 12 countries, and as a result of that, the co-ops so we had 12 people in each country one who were looking for these, and the large majority of these co-ops, they are in agriculture, food distribution, and renewable energies. There's almost no examples in chemicals, automotive industries, and the kind of industries that I think you were alluding to when you talked about big political controversies. So I think on the one hand, the existing co-ops, they are in an interesting space to precisely embody this regenerative circular economy. But at the same time, that's why I was highlighting a bit this tension about the technology. I think they're not very active in the traditional fossil fuel based industries, right? So the question is, what is the relation between these two? Because at least from what we found in this database, there is not much co-op activity in some of the sectors that are most important for moving away from a kind of fossil fuel based economy. And so I guess then the question would be here, is there any kind of prospect for co-op conversion in such industries, and would that actually make a difference? That's a really important question, right? Because what I definitely do believe, and what's very interesting about the co-ops, so the CCSC, the Federation of Co-ops here in Quebec, they had a survey on sustainability and stuff like this with their members, and they said yes, there's a very high opening for sustainability, but it all depends on the will of the members, right? And so a key point is clearly this process, to what extent the members are involved in the discussion of why we do some things that are maybe also, involve some sacrifices or some more painful things. So for example, at this reduction at the source, one aspect that's really interesting are zero waste food co-ops, that try to get rid of plastic in their shops. But this is really complicated both for people who shop and for the employees, because it requires a lot of change in practices. And so you really need to be very patient and have these kind of educational processes to not be just frustrated and have the legitimacy with the participants. And I think as such, the co-op model is fantastic for that. But for me, the question is here, what is the interplay between some co-ops, like the ones, for example, I mentioned before, who are really innovative, and the more established co-op network, and its capacity to absorb such ideas, discuss them, and say, yes, that's part of our movement. And in a sense, they respond to the needs of our time, and we can have to think how we can integrate that, right? And that's of course a much more complicated question, because these more established actors have much more interests and things to lose than newcomers.
That's really a really important point, I think, Rafael. Of course, as you would know, like the larger co-ops often have a more heterogeneous membership, right? It's not just one group of people who all believe the same thing. As they evolve, their membership changes, and they have different interests, as you say, and that I think complicates things. And then there's of course the economic side of things. So this is a really good springboard, I think. So we'll do a little breakout for 10 minutes, Stan. Groups of 3. I'm going to put the question in the chat here. We're going to ask people to answer this question that kind of leverages the conversation we've just had. Do cooperatives have an advantage in creating circular governance networks for mutualizing resources, or for just getting engaged with the circular economy, right? Do you see a co-op advantage there or not? And by the way, this links nicely to our talk that Josephine's going to be offering tomorrow on whether cooperatives are more virtuous or not. So if we can just quick, maybe a 7 minutes, Stan. We'll do 7 minutes, and then we'll reconvene for breakout of 3 persons per group. Well, welcome back, everyone. We're gonna get cracking here. I don't know. I had a really fun conversation with someone, but let's open it up. Who wants to share something with Rafael? Maybe some output from your conversation or a question. Fire away, and you can just unmute yourself. And there's I see Isabel. Go ahead, Isabel.
Thank you, Rafael. That was wonderful. In our conversation, we were thinking about Michael raised toxic masculinity, and we were thinking about other intersectional factors that impact And being the fellow in co-ops diversity and sustainable development, for me, that diversity piece is really important. And so, you know, we were talking about the importance of being critically vigilant about, you know, what thinking is dominating, and actively engaging with women's thinking, Black co-op thinking, Indigenous co-op thinking. I wondered if is that something that your study has been tracking?
So, you know, for the purposes of or for the possibilities of a survey, I think these nuances of ways of thinking are pretty hard to track. But what I'm completely convinced by, what is a real treasure of Canada, is the fact that you have Indigenous-led cooperatives, which can actually create a very interesting way of, you know, so so I think what is a kind of the ambivalence of the circularity is that it can go two ways, right? And circularity can be a pure efficiency discourse for technology, and that's interesting, of course. Who would be against? But it can stay on a level of just instrumentalizing resources to become a bit more efficient once again. And then you have all the rebound effects and so forth, which will prevent you from actually having this reduction of the overall environmental footprint, which was the goal, right? Including then also impacts for well-being. If we think of land use, right, and biodiversity goals, so impossible to achieve this if there's not this. And I think this kind of extended notion of reciprocity is very strongly present. We have one blog, I'll find it in a moment, where an Indigenous cooperator from Quebec, she wrote a blog on her thinking how she links circularity with her way of thinking what a cooperation means. And I think it's these kind of double reciprocity is completely in evidence there, and very interesting. And it's also interesting, it's not at all in denial of that it has to be a business at the same time, right? It doesn't say that at all, but it links it to something more profound in this kind of land ethics sense.
Great, thank you, Rafael. Oh, did you? Oh, was that just a thumbs up, Isabel? It was a thumbs up. Oh, okay, I thought it was a follow-up. Any other comments, questions for Rafael that came out of that discussion? Rafael, in my little breakout, we had a discussion. My interlocutor was in a university environment. Wasn't necessarily plugged into the co-op sector, but I'm just kind of interested if you've had any explorations of that institutional space from this circular economy perspective, and if so, has there been any kind of you observed anything between universities and co-ops? Like, is there a way to partner with universities to kind of address some of these circular economy questions at the university level? They're often very big organizations with thousands of employees, huge, probably large environmental footprint. What's going on there? And then again, is there anything that's happening with the co-op sector between universities and co-ops?
I mean, on the operational level, there's of course lots of interesting opportunities. Like, for example, with your example of the computer, here in Montreal, there's a social enterprise called Insurtech, which was founded for work insertion. For young people, and they're specialized in repair and refurbishment of laptops and electric devices, which are then sold on for a cheaper price. And so the laptops of my university actually go to Insurtech afterwards. So it's an interesting partnership of linking something where universities and other organizations, they have a lot of this electric waste problem, right, and linking it to a meaningful partnership that I think also the university is kind of proud of. On the level more of the research here in Quebec, what is really nice is that for the last 2 years we have this research network in circular economy. And probably not incidentally, it was started in an engineering school, the ETS. but they really make an effort that it's linked now across the different, faculties and disciplines to have this kind of more complex way of thinking about it, because I think everyone has understood that if you really have a transition to circularity, a lot of this is labor intensive. So that means, what kind of work conditions, what kind, who pays for that, what are the policies that can do that. So there's a lot of questions around this. Also linked to Isabel's point, there's some research on so-called consumption labor, which is very gendered, right? Who is doing this? So there's one is the kind of wage labor, the other one is the kind of domestic labor, which is very gendered. So I think there's a lot of questions of who does the work for this circular economy that is very interesting to explore. And so this research network that we have here, I think, is very beneficial for these purposes. And what I can say, just as somebody who's teaching at our sustainability management, the students, they are really extremely interested in these circular economy approaches, and they are kind of surprised to learn when it's a co-op. Right. And my interpretation is that it's maybe partly linked also that co-ops are a model that is really more speaking to something like community and security in a world where this is not necessarily a given. Right. And that could be maybe also something very attractive with co-ops.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rafael. I'm going to put a call out for questions again. While you're deliberating whether you want to ask a question, I do want to note that we have in our midst a leader, or well, former leader of a co-op that I would say was in circular economy. It's Stan. Stan organized a bike co-op that recycles bicycles from the garbage dump, strips them apart, rebuilds them, and makes them available to people all over the city. And I understand from Stan, I don't know if this actually happened, Stan, maybe you can jump in, but the city had asked you to consider doing the same for dishwashers and washing machines and things like that. And so there's some interesting opportunities there. Stan, do you want to say a couple words if you're on there somewhere?
Sure. Thanks, Marc-Andre. Yes, I'm part of the Bridge City Bicycle Cooperative here in Saskatoon. As Marc-Andre mentioned, part of our primary organizational activity is to divert bicycles from the Saskatoon landfill to be reused within our programming. We focus on education, so anyone who's in need of a bike can come to our organization. We provide them with tools, education, volunteers, and of course bicycles to teach them how to repair one to own, and they can take it away at low to no cost. Over the past couple of years, really interesting transition that the city of Saskatoon has completed. They opened up what's called the Material Recovery Center. So it is a new space at the landfill where materials such as bicycles, such as metals, appliances, they're exploring ways to better recycle them, better divert them, similar to the model that we created in partnership with the city, in hopes that, again, there will be less waste overall at the landfill to expand the landfill's lifespan, as well as achieve larger environmental goals. They're exploring mattresses at the moment. Our colleague Jen Bunny, who was on the call, was also in touch with the city about this exploration project, and they're looking for other opportunities as well to hopefully with more organizations like the Bike Co-op to come.
Great, thank you, Stan. Listen, we're pretty much out of time. I want to thank Rafael for a really fun, interesting talk. Rafael, if people want to reach out to you, maybe if that's okay, or you can share your contact information if you're interested. And thank you, Rafael, for being with us today. Before we close, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I found a blog from the Karina Vashish. So just if somebody wants to read what she had to say about co-ops and circularity. So I found it. Yeah, sorry, Mark.
Oh, no, that's great. Thanks, Rafael. And again, I assume people can reach out to you if they have want to follow up. There's lots of great work coming out of HSA. Thank you for that, Rafael. Before we close, I want to draw your attention. I've mentioned this before, but tomorrow, actually, from 4 to 5:30, if you're here in Saskatchewan and Saskatoon, you can show up in person. Otherwise, we'll be online. We're going to have Dr. Joseph Heath. He's going to ask us a really provocative question. Are cooperatives more virtuous than other corporations? So there you go. It's going to be fun to see how that plays out. Our next co-op conversation takes place on January 8th, and our featured speaker will be Chris Bodner. Chris has done some work around BC Tree Fruits Cooperative and their recent dissolution, and I think this is going to be a really vigorous conversation as well. So thank you all again for participating. Thank you, Rafael. Great rest of your day. Rafael, do you want to say something? Go ahead.
Well, just one last little thing, that next year we have a conference in Montreal on the international co-ops.
Yes.
Mark is actually thinking about a panel on complexity
Yes.
and sustainability. And you're all invited, of course, to join. It's also in partnership with the CASC, the Canadian Society for Studies in Cooperation. There are 17 research streams on around all kinds of co-op topics. The deadline is the 15th of January for submission of papers or panel propositions. So I put it in the chat. And if you know of people who might be interested, please pass it on.
Oh, that's great plug. I love that, Rafael. Yes, and HSA and Rafael in particular has taken a real important leadership role in making this happen. So much gratitude to you, Rafael, for taking that on. And then maybe one last thing, as I keep saying last thing, but this is the real last thing. I put a link into chat here about the framework computer, the one that the university won't let me buy. So if anyone's interested, take a look. Okay, have a great rest of your day, everyone. We'll see you soon.